Okay, so what I've taken the time to do, because we're going to do this as a box, is I have my 2-inch by 2-inch square. I've taken the opportunity to draw stuff out with a ruler. I've made sure that I've got 90-degree angles. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my workspace. So I'm going to hang onto my template. Okay, I'm not going to lose my template. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to take this ruler and I'm going to put it aside, and I am going to I'm going to pull out a ruler that I can actually clean pretty easily. If you use a wooden ruler on clay, a lot of times what happens is it gets really dirty. So I've got a plastic ruler that I'm going to use. Okay, you can also use the edge of your template. That works fine too. So now I'm going to get my space set up. Okay, so here's my space coming in. I have to make sure that my workspace is good. I have my cup of water, so I'm ready to go with that. And I've got clay to work with. So I'm going to unwrap some clay, and I'm going to flatten it out. So in order to do the box well, you've got to make sure that your clay is flattened. You don't want to have the clay really, really bumpy. You want to flatten it out. So I'm going to cut a piece of clay off this block. Okay. And if you look at this, it's got some thickness to it. Okay. Now I can flatten that out with my hands pretty easily. Okay, just by pressing it with my fingers. And I can flatten the piece of clay out. Then you want to press it down on your surface. And remember, you can roll this out with pretty much anything. I'm going to grab a little jar that I have, which is empty. And it's a little glass jar, and I'm going to use it to roll with. It's got a lid on it, but I can roll that out. So anything like a glass jar works pretty good. If you have a dowel, that works pretty good. Okay, so I just cut this piece of clay off of the block. I'm going to pick it up and check it. It looks pretty smooth. Thickness looks pretty good. Feels like it's going to work. Now I want to see, will my square fit on it? If my square fits on that piece, I can cut it right out. But it doesn't quite, so I want to roll it out a little more. And as you're rolling, don't forget, you want to pick the clay up a little bit when you do it. There it is. Okay. So you have that's going. Okay. So now, there's my piece. It's going to go on there. I can hold it tight. I can use my plastic ruler. I can cut right to my shape. So I'm using the plastic knife, and what I'm doing is I'm cutting to my template. If you can look close, you can sort of see what I'm doing. My template is kind of sitting on the clay. It's actually kind of holding to the clay, which isn't bad. Save all of your pieces. Remember, small pieces, you can turn them into slip. You can put them together, okay? So I'm trimming right to my template. So now I'm going to save all of my pieces. So I've got pieces that I've saved. Pick up my template. I'm going to use that again. So now I've got one done. I'm going to need 4 more. So I'm going to cut some more clay because I'm doing piece by piece. I could also take this big piece of clay. I could push the whole piece of clay out, and I could lay it out that way too. All right. So I'm going to cut a bigger piece of clay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to push it out a little differently for you so you can see what I'm talking about. Once you get pieces cut, save them, okay? I need that. I'm going to put that aside. These are all pieces that I'm going to use. So I'm going to take all those pieces and I'm going to save them. There's that. So now I've got this piece of clay. I'm going to squeeze it together with my fingers. Just to, again, kind of very much like you're feeling a pinch pot, okay? And I'm kind of squeezing it together to get the clay to work, okay? Just pushing it together so you can see what's going on. And our job is going to be, in order to get this to work, is I want to get my thickness good. So I've got it like that. I'm going to use the jar method to roll it out. I could flatten it with my hands like this. That works easily too, all right? But I like using like the end of a jar or something to help get a little pressure. This could also be a wooden dowel. If I had a wooden dowel, I could do that. If I had a small rolling pin, I can use it. Either way.
Sir, how thin can it be?
I would say when you're rolling this out for thickness, try to keep it at about 1/4 of an inch thick. If you go a 1/2 inch, you know, you might be a little bit too big. So if I hold my ruler up, a 1/2 inch is pretty thick. I'm going to try to come a little closer so as you can see. 1/2 inch is pretty thick. If you go to 1/4 of an inch, that's good. In between 1/4 and 1/2 is good. If you start to go to like 3/4 of an inch thick, it starts to get too heavy. So try to go about about 1/4 inch thick. Now I've got a thick part here that I'm going to thin out, and I've got some thick parts there I'm going to thin out. And I'm just using my jar rolling pin method, okay? And again, it's something, if you have a jar around the house, you can take the lid off. I'm just keeping the lid on this one. And just roll it out. Just push it and roll it out. This doesn't work as well if you have something like a tin can, because quite often the tin cans have lines and stuff in them quite often. And also, this is less sharp than a tin can, and it works better. So if you have an old jar, you know, you finished up the mustard, or you finished up a bunch of pickles or something like that, you can use the jar to help roll things out. And if you get lines in it a little bit, you can shift by flipping it, turning it over, and checking the other side. So I'm just trying to get as much surface and get things as thin as I can. Okay? So I'm going to look at my thickness now overall, and I can pick it up and I can feel it and feel the thickness. The thickness seems pretty good. Okay? Seems pretty decent. So now, and I'm feeling it with my hands, it feels pretty good. Okay, so now I'm coming back to my template. And I want to try to lay out as many on here as I can, okay? So that I can get one there. If I put one here, I might get 2. So I'm going to test and see. So can I get 2? Pretty close. All right, so I'm going to try to roll this out a little bit more to give myself a little more length, okay? And I can also piece this together when I'm doing it as well. That's another thing, of course, about clay. You can join it and piece it together. Okay. If I use the bottom of my jar, you see I have marks in it. I'm going to hold that up a little bit. So that's one of the things that you want to try to avoid. So I'm going to try to avoid using the bottom of my jar. My jar, if it was completely smooth on the bottom, I could also press it out that way too. Okay. So I'm just going to get rid of those marks. I can also get rid of them with my thumb, just by taking my fingers to the clay. And again, pushing it out, any of those marks I can get rid of. I'm not using any water at this point because I want to be able to cut the clay, and I don't want the clay to be too soft. Okay, so there it is. Now I've got my template. My template goes on, okay, like that. And I'm going to mark to it. So I'm going to have to move this square because I've only got one cut. I'm going to need 4 more. Okay, so I'm going to cut again, check there. Now I'm going to see where I can get another one. I can line it right up next to the edge. My main thing is I want it to fit on the clay. So I can go edge to edge, okay? And I'm making sure that all my corners fit. I can get them right next to each other. I'm going to mark this out, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. You'll be able to see it. So I'm marking this out. And then I'm not cutting it yet. I'm just marking it so you can see, okay? So what I'm doing is this square, I'm going to hold this up a little bit so you can see. This square and this square share a line. Okay? That means I can get them. I don't have to leave big spaces. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ruler, and I'm going to cut against my ruler to make sure it's even. And I'm going to save all my pieces. So there's one square there, but I have to finish cutting. Here's my first one, and I'm going to cut this. And again, using a ruler, I'm thinking about 90-degree angles in the corners. Save all the pieces. So this is now working this way. Okay, here we go. And this one is working this way. Okay, so you can kind of see what that's doing. All right, you can get an idea of what's happening. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go to a slightly larger screen, and hopefully this will help. So now I'm at a bigger screen. I apologize for being on a short screen. So I've gotten to the point where I've got all my pieces set up, okay? And I've got these here. I've got another one here. So again, I want to cut and make this work for you, okay? So now I have got 3 pieces, and I'm going to need 2 more. Now I can take these pieces of clay that I've got here, and I can put them together. And again, I'm using water to create a sense of slip. I'm going to press the clay down, referred to as beveling. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm pressing it down as beveling. And again, I apologize for the fact that I didn't have the bigger screen on so you could see it easier. I forgot to pin it. So now at least you'll be able to see this a little bit better. I apologize for the small screen. I'm going to score, and I'm going to score here. Slip, and slip, and I'm going to put the pieces together. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. I'm going to join them together. Once I've pressed them in good and tight, like that, join it well, get the slip in place, okay? I can flip it over, make sure I get a good join on the other side, press it down tight so that the clay holds on itself. I can come back to using my rolling pin, in this case, my rolling jar, and I can roll stuff out, get pressure on it. So I can roll things out. And again, if you have a dowel or something at home, you can do that too. So I'm rolling this out, trying to get good pressure. And now I want to see if my template's going to fit. And it fits. So now I can cut around this. And I'm going to start to speed up because I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to show everybody how this goes together. Okay. So I'm trimming. Now I've got 4. I'm going to need 1 more. Because if you start with them being all the same size, you're going to have to manipulate it a little bit when you put it together, but it's not that hard. Okay. All right. So I've got another piece of clay here, and I'm taking slip, and I'm going to join a section in, and then I'm going to smooth this out. So I'm joining that in with slip, good pressure, because again, you don't want the clay to come apart. And I'm forcing it together with my fingers. Okay, so you can sort of see what's going on there. All right, and I'm forcing that clay together, making sure it's good and tight. And I'm going to take my jar, and I'm going to roll into that edge a little bit. Okay. And if I've got any areas that really raised up, I can use my finger. As you can see like that, I've just smoothed stuff out with my finger as well.
Mr.
Right.
Billy,
Yes, please ask.
I'm lost.
You're lost? I'm going to repeat. You don't have to worry. I will repeat everything. And again, this is the first demo. Not everybody is at the stage where they're ready to make this yet because they're finishing up the other work. That's okay. I just kind of wanted to show people that are ready to jump forward. Okay?
Oh,
But that's what's going to happen. Once you submit the coil pot, I want you to start thinking about the box. I will have a recording of this available, and I will post it so that people can get to it and find it. Okay? It's only going to be pinned from the point with the big screen where I started cutting out the pieces, but you'll hear me talking. You'll be able to see me in a little screen. All right, so I'm going to flip this. Looks pretty smooth, right? Looks pretty good. So now I'm going to cut the other piece. So at this point, what we've done is we've drawn out a template. We've used the template to mark the clay. We've made sure the clay is rolled out or pressed out. And we're thinking in terms of something like about 1/4 inch thick because we don't want this to be real heavy because then the box just looks unwieldy, doesn't look good. So I'm going to save my template because even though it's a piece of paper, if it's allowed to dry, it can be used again. So we're going to cut through here and through here. Now I'm going to talk about assembling, and it's pretty straightforward. Okay, all my pieces of clay, my little pieces, all this stuff, I'm going to save it. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it together, I'm going to pound it together. I'm going to take a little bit of slip, and I'm going to put some slip on it to help put it together. Okay, that clay is good. I've got some more on the side over here. I'm going to put some slip on that and put that together. All that clay is reusable. There's my block of clay that I was cutting stuff off of. Excuse me, you can see it over here. There's the pieces of clay that are left over after I've cut it. I'm putting it directly on the block of clay because it's got slip on it, and I'm pressing it in. And I'm going to reuse this. So now I've got my plastic. I'm going to wrap it up and save it. So that's going to be put away because all I need right now is this. All right. So with all of these pieces that are ready, I need a bottom and I need some sides. So I'm looking for a nice even piece. You can see the thickness might vary slightly, okay? But I want a good even piece for my bottom. That one looks good. So this is going to be my bottom. All right, put that aside. Now, we want to join it together, and I'm going to stand it up so you can sort of see what I'm talking about. Okay, try to get it over here. So we're joining pieces together. Okay, so you have pieces on the outside and pieces on the inside. So for example, if you look down on this, and I'm going to point, these pieces are on the inside, these are on the outside. And wherever the clay is touching, that's scores and slips, okay? So I'm going to start by scoring and slipping things. All right. So I'm going to score, and you can use the knife to score with. Just make X's. You don't have to go too deep into the clay. Okay. You can use a plastic fork like we talked about. You can use that to score with. But the main thing is when you're scoring something, you want to make sure that there's enough there on the edges, because those little scratch marks are what's going to hold the slip. This is the part that goes in. So now I have to score on the edge. If I hold it up, you can sort of see I'm scoring the edge. I'm not scoring inside, I'm scoring the edge. And you do that on both outside edges. That's done. Now I have to do this one on the outside edges. And I'm coming back in and outside edges. So now I've got that all scored. Now what I have to do is get slip. So I'm going to take slip, and I'm going to slip my areas where it goes together. And because I have 2 on each one gets slip wherever it's scored. So that gets slip, and this gets slip. Okay? Now I want to put it together. And I don't have the bottom in yet. I'm just putting the sides together. Press it together. Make sure that it is even on the outside. Okay? If I hold that a little bit this way, you can sort of see you want it to be even on the outside. Okay? So that's an inside one. This is another inside. Press it together. And the outside. Line it up and press it together. Now, depending on how you cut this, you might find it's a little off. One side might be a little shorter or something like that. We can fix that. But right now, you're pressing the pieces together. So what I've got is I've got the basic shape, but I want to make sure I get my corners tight. So I'm pressing inside. I sometimes like to take the back of the plastic knife, hold it inside. Okay, let me try to do it over here so you can see. Kind of hold it inside like that. It gives me a little place to hold against and makes it easier for me to join my corners. And then you have to wiggle the knife a little bit because it might be stuck. Okay. And then the next step is we're going to put the bottom in. So once you get all the corners tight together, okay, I'm slipping and scoring and everything looks good. Now the bottom goes on. In this case,
yeah, I'm done.
Okay, fantastic. Are you done with the coil or done with a box?
Both.
Both? You're fast. Okay. I haven't even put the box assignment up yet. But what's going to happen as we start to go forward, people are going to be able to move at their own progress. Okay. So that's great. So make sure that the pinch pot's been presented, right? So you don't have to worry about that. All right. So you notice my box bottom. See how it's smaller? If I want to make a base for this that covers the outside, then I would have to cut one of these a little bigger. But I can very easily take this and I can make it fit into there. Okay? So what I've done is I've laid it in, and I can see where I need to make a little trimming. So I make a mark where it's going to trim right there a little bit. So I'm going to take a little off of that outside edge because I want it to drop inside. All right, that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to take a little off the outside edge, and I'm going to test it. Yep, it fits. Now I got to get it to fit the other way. Again, I'm going to save pieces. Now that's going to fit. So what I can do is going in here again, slip. I'm going to score the inside where it's going to go. This is a little harder way to put the bottom in. You might find an easier way just to make the piece bigger on the outside, which means you could put this as a pattern on top of another piece of clay and draw around it. But since I was going on the smaller version, I'm going to go with that. Okay, and now what's going to happen is the bottom is going to go inside. So I'm going to lay it down, and I'm going to set it up at the bottom. And I'm just going to make sure I get good pressure on the sides. Okay, and make sure that everything is in place, and that looks good. I'm going to put a little reinforcement to the inside. I can see a space that needs a little reinforcement. So now I'm putting an extra piece of clay on the inside to help reinforce my corners. The back part of the knife is good to push things into the corner. And I'm just going to lay that in there and reinforce that corner. So I'm going to hold this into the camera so you can see I've put a piece of clay in the bottom. There's a little extra space. So what I've done is I'm forcing some clay into that bottom area there. and I'm sliding things together. Anything extra that I don't want in there, I can take out. Or I can just smooth down with the edge of the knife. So I'm going to get into those corners tight. Okay. And I'm using the edge of the knife to smooth everything in. Now, when I pick it up, if I have got spaces on the bottom, here's a problem that happened. When I was cutting and talking, I wasn't paying attention, and I made this too short. Okay. So what I've done is I've reinforced it. So now what I want to do is I want to take slip, okay, and a little bit of thin clay, and I can reinforce any of the corners that I want just by pressing slip into it. Making sure that it's tight, and I can press it in. Here, if I need a little bit extra, I had a little piece of clay there with slip on it, I can force it in. The main thing is that we want it to get tight. So by pressing it together, if you put pressure all along the outside, it'll work for you. And I'm just using that to kind of slip and score things in place. I'm using the edge of the knife to smooth the slip in and make sure everything is tight. The slip is going down into the edges, into here, so that it bonds everything together. Okay? And just get the slip all in place. Now my bottom is tight, okay? I don't see any light on the inside. And the last step is going to be, that's what there is to it. The last step is just to make sure that things look even. If you've got anything that's sticking over the edge, take the knife and you can smooth things together. I've got a long edge, so I'm using the knife to smooth it in. Okay? So that's the basics of making a box. Okay? So you can kind of see how it looks. That's the basics. With a mistake, which I made on the bottom. But the mistake, you can't really tell I made the mistake because I fixed it. Okay, does that make sense? Does anybody have questions about this basic process? Any questions at all about the basics?
Is that the biggest it can be?
No, you can go bigger. I wouldn't go any smaller than 2 by 2. Anything smaller than 2 by 2 is kind of hard to build. But what if you decide I've got enough clay, I want to make a box that's 4 by 4 inches? You can make it big. It's up to you. Depends on how much material you have in hand. Okay. I was able to get away with not too much material because I was planning for something small and I didn't have a huge amount of material here. So if I had a huge amount of clay, I can make a box any size I want. Okay. And also, if you have any lines or anything on the top, I like to take a little slip on the top and just smooth the edges together, just to kind of smooth everything evenly. If something is a little tall or a little uneven, you can take the knife, you can scrape stuff away. Like I got a little raised part there that I can scrape away. So you can, again, you can make it any size that you want. Okay, but the main thing is that it should look even. If it looks like that and it's twisted, then something happened. Either a side isn't measured right or something. You want to pull it back together, make sure things are tight, and make sure things look even. Okay, I even take the time with my fingers on the inside to make sure that things aren't pushed in. Okay, so that's the next project. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving on. So in other words, as you finish the coil pot, it gets submitted, move on to the box. After the box is done, there'll be another assignment, okay? But the absolute date that we need to have the coil pot submitted is it will be next Thursday, will be the time that we need to make sure that we've got everything submitted. I'm pretty sure that's the date that we've got set up, but we can double check that in Google Classroom. All right, so we're going to end at this point, and we're going to watch our time. I've got just about 12:41.